As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, bring the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
It is an extreme pleasure for us to welcome on one of the guys we grew up watching on the big stage in the NHL, Pierre McGuire. Pierre, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Casey. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
You've been a busy man recently. You were at the Hall of Fame induction last week. Then I ran into you on the road at your stop on the unnamed team down the road that you used to coach for as the Clarkson Golden Knights took them on, a little ECAC women's hockey. Then the next night you're on the UMass broadcast. You've taken over a pretty big role with the ECAC. What is it about the current college hockey landscape that makes that a spot you want to spend your time right now?
Casey, I always was a college guy. When I was a kid growing up in Montreal, I had a chance to go play major junior. My father did not allow me to go. And I played a lot of other sports. I played football, I played hockey, I played baseball. So I've always been a huge proponent and fan of college hockey. It doesn't mean that major junior is wrong. It's actually a really good product. But I grew up in the college brand, and I'm a big believer in it. And I coached in it, and I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed college hockey.
There's been a lot of different things going on in the college hockey landscape, whether it be NIL or the CHL ruling that just came out a couple of weeks ago. From your perspective, where do you think the landscape goes over the next 5 to 10 years? And more specifically, like what regions do you think realistically see the biggest increase in teams making that jump to Division I?
Well, the second part of the question, I don't know, because I don't know how realistic it is. We just saw AIC leave Division I and go down to Division II. I grew up playing in college hockey when there was clearly defined Division I, Division II, and Division III. For instance, I'll use an example. The University of Maine was an elite Division II team when I was playing college hockey, and then became a Division I team, and it took some building to get there. RIT was a top Division II team, and eventually morphed into a Division I team. So I've seen the landscape change a lot on that part of it. In terms of where I think college hockey is going, I think it's going up. The relationship, it'll be interesting to see it evolve between major, junior, and college. I do. So this is my theory on it, and I'll make it quick. I use Brady Tkachuk as a litmus test, as an example of how good college hockey is. When he was a draft-eligible player at Boston University, he had 8 goals. He scored 8 goals. His rookie year, the next year in the NHL on a non-playoff team, he scored 23. I don't think people realize how good college hockey is and how hard it is to score. So I see most 17, 18, and 19-year-olds aren't good enough to play college hockey, but they are good enough to play major junior. And then most of those 18 and 19-year-olds aren't good enough to play pro hockey, so they want to extend their runway as a player. So what they do is eventually I think they will come and play college hockey. It will give them 2 or 3 more years to improve. And I think this is going to be great for major junior. I think it's going to be really good for college hockey. And I've told a lot of college coaches over the last 10 days or 2 weeks that the number one thing I'd do if I were a college coach is I would redefine how my staff is built. I would take away one of the assistant coaching positions and basically turn it into a hockey operations person whose only job is to scout, identify, build relationships, and find a way to make your program amenable to major junior players.
Let me quickly follow up on that, Pierre. What do you think that's going to do with the roster sizes then? If you're saying that these major junior players are sometimes don't get that opportunity to jump up and play college hockey, with the NIL ruling, there's a roster cap of 26. Mm-hmm. Does that mean a lot of schools are going to opt out of that 26?
I don't think so. I think you're going to see most of the top Division I teams that are truly in Division I to compete for a national championship. I think they'll have no problem doing that. I also think going forward, you're going to see more and more sponsorship agreements. I can tell you right now, under the leadership of Doug Christensen and the ECAC, they're searching out actively more sponsorship agreements, and I think that's great for the league. It's great for the teams involved in the league, and it's awesome for the players. And what we forget, it's not just the men's side, it's the women's side too. And I'll just tell you, I don't want to bore people with numbers. But if you go look at the enrollment of women's hockey players starting from, let's just say, 1990 to today, so a 35-year expanse of time, you will be shocked at how much greater the enrollment is for women players versus men players. I think the next great domain for hockey is not just going to be the growth of college hockey in the men's side. It's going to be the growth of women's hockey in every entity, whether it's college, professional, prep school, because there is really no junior for women. It's going to be just exponential. The growth for women's hockey is going to be massive.
You had an impressive rise to the big leagues in less than 10 years from coaching lacrosse at Hobart. And a shout out to one of our listeners, Billy Bergen, who you coached with his father there, I'm told.
One of my old teammates, Billy.
That's right. And 10 years later, you're the youngest coach in the NHL at 32 years old in Hartford. Each of us have that dream on the broadcast side, calling college games right now. For you, what made that jump so quick possible?
Well, there are lots of things. One, friendships. Two, working hard at it. Three, really not having a personal life except for living in the rink and being committed to the game. Ray Sherrill is one of my best friends, and he's the one that really pushed me. When I was, after my third year at Babson College as a coach, I got offered 6 assistant coaches jobs, 2 of them in the West and 4 of them in the East. And Ray said, Pierre, you got to go to St. Lawrence and meet Joe Marsh. So I did. And as soon as I met Coach Marsh, I knew that's where I wanted to go. And I spent 2 amazing years there. But one of the things that really worked out for me, not only were our teams really good, and Joe really endorsed our recruiting patterns, which we built up in Western Canada and north of Ottawa and into Montreal and east of Montreal. I got to meet Scotty Bowman, whose daughter was going to St. Lawrence at the time, and he was working for Hockey Night in Canada. And we developed a relationship. And after about 6 months of that relationship, he said, I think I'm going to take the New York Rangers job. And if I do, I want to hire you and have you come with me. I really enjoy the way you run practices. Well, he went and got offered the job, but he called me up and he says, I hope you didn't tell St. Lawrence you're leaving. I said, no, I didn't. Why? He goes, I'm not taking the job even though they offered it. I don't think this thing's going to work out. Well, it kind of worked out okay. Neil Smith got hired in 94. They won the cup. Now, this was 1989, so it's a little different. But then the next year, I was sitting on my couch after golfing at the golf course in Canton, New York, and I was watching ESPN, and they had breaking news. It was a press conference in Pittsburgh. Craig Patrick, Bob Johnson, and Scotty Bowman were being hired to run the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm telling you, there are no cell phones in those days, guys. I'm watching this breaking news on ESPN, and my phone rings in my kitchen. So I go and pick it up, and I say, hello, and there's no caller ID either. And I go, hello. He goes, Pierre? I go, yeah, it's Scotty Bowman. I'm sitting with Craig Patrick and Bob Johnson. What are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, not a lot. He goes, there'll be a plane ticket for you in Ottawa. I want you to fly to Toronto, meet me there, have your list ready of all the players you've scouted over the last 4 or 5 years. We're going to Vancouver for the NHL draft. And that was my opportunity. I am not kidding you. That's how it happened. And Scotty and I spent that whole ride from Toronto to Vancouver going over all these lists. And again, we didn't have personal computers back then. Things were a lot different. There was a lot of paper flying around, Casey, all over the place. And then we got into the meetings. I met all the guys at the Pan Pacific Hotel in Vancouver. The head scout, Greg Malone, Craig Patrick, Bob Johnson, they were all there. All the scouts were there. And at the end of the meeting, Craig grabbed me and he goes, okay, who do you think the best player in the draft is? And I said, well, the best player is Jaromir Jagr. The guy that everybody's going to take first is Owen Nolan. And he said, are you sure that Jaromir Jagr is the best player in this draft? I said, 100%. It's not close. He's the best player. So I can tell you, you see, I have no notes. Jaromir Jagr went 5th, but number 1 was Owen Nolan. Number 2 was Peter Nedved. Number 3 was Keith Primo. And number 4 was Mike Ricci. Now, that's 35 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And number 6 after Jaromir Jagr was Scott Sissons to the New York Islanders. So I just remember, this is going to blow you guys away. I remember walking off the floor with Scotty, and he goes, you better be freaking right, man, because it'll be a short career for you if you're wrong. So, yeah.
It's unbelievable.
He's still playing professionally. So look at that. You got him into the pro ranks in the NHL after drafting him, and he's still playing.
Yeah, no, it was a team effort. I was just part of it, but I just remember the discussion. The guy that deserves most of the credit on that is Craig Patrick. The 1980 Olympics, he was assistant to Herb Brooks, and he developed an unbelievable array of contacts in Europe, in Russia, and in Eastern Europe. And he knew that if we did it right, and it was all on him, Craig did an amazing job, he'd be able to get Yarmer out. Back then, there was no transfer agreements between the NHL and a lot of these entities in Eastern Europe in particular. And Craig went over actually right after the draft and got Yarmer out. And Yarmer didn't go back. He stayed in Pittsburgh right after the draft. So there are a lot of moving parts on it, but I'll tell you one thing. Craig Patrick was the brains behind the operation. To work for Craig was amazing as a young person. He was brilliant, really, really brilliant, and he empowered you to just go do your job. He really was great.
Focusing a little more on the broadcasting side, you work with various partners. How difficult is it to not step on them? Obviously, they have different cadences, different deliveries, but you just seem to mesh well with whomever you're paired up with, whether you're between the benches or up in the booth. How seamless is that for you, or is it really difficult and you just make a mindful effort?
What a great question. And so here's the way I would try to describe it. Every game I went into as a player or a coach or even a broadcaster, I always scouted it. So I'd scout different voice cadences with partners I might work with. I'd scout the way teams like to place. For instance, when Ken Hitchcock was coaching in the NHL, his teams were more about dumping, chasing, and forechecking. So that allows the flow of the game to go a little quicker, not as many stoppages. Other guys, Detroit, would play a puck possession game and there'd maybe be a couple more offsides. So that would change the cadence of the play-by-play. So you study all these different things and all these different trends. And so I was really fortunate. When I broke in on the radio first in Montreal with the Canadiens, I had a partner named Dino Sisto, and he was outstanding because you could tell his voice pattern pretty well. And then I went to TSN and I worked with, an amazing partner, Gordon Miller. We had an 11-year relationship that was off the charts, whether it was NHL, World Junior, Olympics. We did a lot of things together. And then Chris Cuthbert came in, and finally, Kenny Albert and Doc Emmerich. I mean, I've been really fortunate. I kind of won the lottery when it came to partners. But I did study a lot of what they did. To try to make sure that I didn't step on them.
To that end, where do you feel you have the best feel for the game? Is it between I would imagine it would have to be between the benches as opposed to high up in the broadcast area.
Between the Benches was created by Sam Flood at NBC, and I'll never forget it. It was 2004. Calgary was playing Tampa in the Stanley Cup final, and before Game 5 in Tampa, I was working the pregame show on the studio panel with Bob McKenzie of TSN and Gordon Miller of TSN. And after the hit was over, a gentleman walked up to me and he says, "Hi, I'm Sam Flood from NBC Sports. We just got the rights to the NHL." And he said, "Do you think you could broadcast a game from between the benches?" And I said, "Well, I know I can, but I can tell you right now, there's no way Gary Bettman and the NHL are going to allow that." He said, "You leave that to Dick Ebersol, who was the head of NBC Sports and an iconic person in the TV business, and me," meaning Sam Flood, "and if you think you can do it, you got the job." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "I'm telling you, you got the job." So I said, "Well, I know I can do it." He goes, "Good. Just don't tell anybody, and we're going to build this out." Now, the next year was the nuclear winter. We didn't have hockey because of the work stoppage. But we did a lot of planning, almost a year's worth of planning about how Inside the Glass was going to work. And now I think when you watch all sports, basically everybody has copied what NBC created with that footprint of Inside the Glass or on the sidelines or in the dugouts for Major League Baseball. And so I think the field is fantastic down there. It allows you to tell stories and be aware of things that you would never be aware of upstairs. So I think it's a valuable position, and I credit Dick Ebersol and Sam Flood and Gary Bettman for having the courage to try it. I just want to tell you guys one quick story about the 2007 Stanley Cup final, and I hope it doesn't bore your viewers or you guys. We were doing the playoffs early on in 07, and Colorado was playing Anaheim. And it was the first time NBC had gone into Anaheim to do games, and there was no inside the glass position. So we went to Brian Burke, who was working out, believe it or not, by the Anaheim Ducks dressing room. He was a GM there, and I had been hired by Brian to be his coach in Hartford, one of his coaches. So I went to Berkey and I said, hey, this is Sam Flood from NBC. We got a bit of an issue. We broadcast games from He goes, I know. He's really gruff. He goes, I know what you guys do. Can you shut your mouth and just go on the bench and not bother my coaches? That's how he talks. I said, yes, Brian, we can do that. He goes, then you'll be on the bench whenever you're in Anaheim, and hopefully it's all the way to the final. Well, they went to the final. They win the cup against Ottawa in 5 games. But the story that's fun, there was a bad turnover by somebody from Anaheim, and I forget who it was. Excuse me. And I said, that's an egregious turnover by the Anaheim Duck player. Sean O'Donnell, who's a really smart guy, turns around on the bench. He's one of the big defensemen that are playing for Anaheim. He goes, what's that word? I never heard of it. And the whole, it's on tape, and I'm sure it is, you see like Chris Pronger, Scott Niedermeyer, Sean O'Donnell, Francois, they're all laughing. They're like, what the heck's he doing? And the coach is looking down the bench. What'd you say? I said, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. This is in the middle of the game, a Stanley Cup final game. But anyways, it all worked out. But every time I think of Sean, I always think of, what's that mean? It's pretty good.
Here, I can speak for all of our viewers. I think you can tell stories all day and nobody will get bored of them. But shifting over to the current NHL game, obviously, you've been big into scouting your entire career. So on to 2024, 2025, what are some of the things you've been seeing, whether it be storylines, things that you've been surprised about, and kind of things that you're tracking throughout this season so far?
That is an awesome question because trends change all the time. You can have 4 different trending storylines over the course of an 82-game schedule or in college over the course of a 32 to 34-game schedule. I love that question. The importance of the third line that manufactures offense. So I'll use a case in point. The number 1 team in the league right now are the Winnipeg Jets. So with Nino Niederreiter, Adam Lowry, and Mason Appleton, right now it can be argued. Doesn't mean they are, but right now you could argue that's the best depth line in the National Hockey League. And because of that depth line, they're the number 1 team right now. It doesn't mean it'll last forever in the NHL. So a trending story for me as I watch all these teams, what kind of supplemental offense are you getting from your third line? Not your fourth line. What are you getting from your third line? Another trending thing is in-zone coverage. Everybody wants to play, quote-unquote, the hybrid system. Nobody really knows what the hybrid system is with in-zone coverage. So I'll use the Montreal Canadiens as an example. They've really improved. In the last 3 games, they shut out Edmonton last night, but in the last 3 games, they've played a ton better. They've won 2 games in a row. And what they've done is they put a lot more pressure in the neutral zone on the puck carrier, so it's harder access into their zone. They've done a better job from the hash mark to the icing line, eliminating people more quickly. And they've taken away options because their down low coverage is better. So there's an example of another trend. In-zone coverages have to be far more aggressive. So if you're not, because everybody's running these high cycles right now with the interchange between the defense and the forwards, if you're not taking away space early, you're in trouble. So that's another trend in the league. And the one trend I would like to see more of that's not there yet, I'd like to see the NHL take out the goal lines where the goalies can't play, the trapezoid, where the goalies can't play the puck. Because I think if you took the trapezoids out and allowed the goalies to play the puck, there'd be way more mistakes and it would lead to way better opportunities to score. And I think we need more goals as we go forward.
Definitely. I think one thing that you mentioned there with the depth scoring, right? Like I think an opposite use case right there is the Boston Bruins. I was at the game last night and just felt like there was not a lot outside of those top guys that were really giving production, and they were booed off the ice against Columbus at home. So it's definitely an interesting way that you point that out there.
No, but that's a huge point, and I'll show you what. So think about 2 years ago. Boston had Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, and Charlie Coyle. Those were their top three centers. Well, that's not their top three centers anymore. So if you don't have thrust through the middle of the ice and you're not dominating faceoffs, which they used to with those three, imagine Charlie Coyle in the 3-hole. I mean, that's a hell of a player, and that's a hell of a situation if you got two guys better than him. And that's why they were so good. Jimmy Montgomery's first year, they were excellent because those guys were so good down the middle. They're not nearly as good down the middle anymore. I think they were counting on a lot more from Matt Poitras, and now he's playing in Providence, and that hasn't happened for him. So we'll see. I don't like it when fans go after coaches, and just because I was a coach, and I get it. But I'll tell you this: in the NHL, coaches don't pick the players. The management and the scouts pick the players. And I just don't know if Jimmy's been given a roster that's good enough to compete at the level that fans expect.
I'm gonna counter that Matt point by saying Pasternak had 0 shots on goal yesterday. So to say the top line was doing everything it could last night, it's not. I don't think is very accurate. Let's stick in the East. My favorite team, the New York Rangers. They've been struggling this season, and now Filipino gets another injury. Nobody knows how long he's going to be out. You talked about third line scoring. That line of Hedel, Cooley, and Kakko has been tremendous for the Rangers. What do you see coming up for them? You know, right now, Johnny Brodzinski is scheduled to slot in, but what do you see from that lineup and their forwards?
It's such a good question because I agree with you. And we talked about this. I thought the two best on my podcast, which is called the Eye Test with my partner, Jimmy Murphy. I thought the two.
Great lesson, by the way.
Thank you. The two best depth lines in the league was Cooley, Hedel in New York, and what they were able to do with whomever played on the right side. And then you look at what we talked about with Winnipeg, and now without Hedel, who's having a tremendous start to the year, that's a big, big problem. I think Kaapo Kakko's going to continue to evolve and get better as a player in New York. I don't know. The one thing I'd say, though, Jonathan Quick is like found money. The depth and goal overcomes a lot of the blemishes that are part of maybe the Rangers' defense. I would like to see, and I don't know what you guys think, but I'd like to see Keandre Miller be a more reliable defender. So I think that's an important thing for them. And the other thing that set them back a little bit, the injury to Ryan Lindgren at the start of the year. He's such an important player, especially when he's paired with Adam Fox. So there's a lot, but the Rangers are a good team. I give them a lot of credit. That's it. By the way, fellas, I love coaches. Like, I really respect what they do because I've walked in their shoes. Peter Laviolette, I remember when he was a player. I was coaching at Babs, and he was a player at Westfield State. Like, I'm just telling you where this guy's come from and where he is now. I remember when he started coaching. He started coaching in Wheeling, West Virginia, in the East Coast Hockey League. He has had an amazing career. He's one of the best American-born coaches of all time. And he's had a spectacular run. And I think with Phil Halsey there and Michael Pekka there, they're an amazing coaching staff. I think one of the best in the NHL. I really do.
So obviously kids will watch the games on TV and, growing up, they want to be, Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby. And, me and everybody else doesn't have the skill or the athleticism to ever really fill those shoes. But, when watching the game as an announcer and analyst, who are some of the guys in the league right now that you would think kids could model their games around and give them a better chance to make it to that professional level?
Well, I like that. JT Miller would be one that comes to mind right away. He's not super fast. He's not super big. He's just really good. So you can see, like, he's a valuable guy. Anze Kopitar, I will never forget this, fellas. In 2005, I was at the World Championships in Austria. It was in Innsbruck and it was in Vienna. And David Conti's a legendary scout for ever. He was with the New Jersey Devils. Then he went to Vegas, and now he's with the New York Islanders. And David and I were just sitting in an empty rink in Innsbruck, which is more known for skiing than hockey, in the spring of 2005. I will never forget this. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm watching Kopitar because I want to be ready." Now, that's his draft year. And he said to me, "Pierre, there's only one player in the draft better than him." I said, "Come on." He goes, "Nope, there's only one player in the draft better than him." And I go, "Well, it's got to be Crosby." He goes, "It is Crosby. That's the only one better. And all these teams are going to make a mistake, and he will not go in the top 10. Now that's from a development guy, one of the top scouts in the history of the NHL, David Conti. And he was right on. And I was watching this guy, and you guys can look it up online. In 2005, the Slovenians almost beat, and I didn't say Slovakians, the Slovenians almost beat Canada, and Canada had a murderer's row of players because of Anze Kopitar. And so you talk about players can copy. Kopitar's an amazing player. You can learn so much from watching him every day. Watch him every day. Sam Bennett, watch him every day. There's a bunch of guys like that you can study and learn so much. They're not always the slickest guys. They're just the smartest guys.
Between Olympics and Stanley Cup finals, you've been a part of almost every one of the biggest events in hockey. What are some of the most memorable moments that will last with you forever after your career's over?
The first Stanley Cup for Chicago in 2010. They hadn't won the Cup since '61. I had coached against them in '92. We swept them when I was in Pittsburgh, and Mike Keenan and Daryl Sutter were running the Blackhawks. So the 2010 Patrick Kane goal in Game 6 in Philadelphia was pretty special. I remember that one very clearly. Laviolette in Carolina winning in '06 in Game 7 against Edmonton is one that I remember really clearly. The 2010 Olympics in Canada, the pressure was so on Canada to win, Casey. It was amazing. And, I'll never forget it. Between the benches, you guys will appreciate this. Ginla's in the corner. Ryan Miller's in goal for USA. And Crosby, who's not really a vocal player, but I could hear him. You're talking about 18,000 people screaming and yelling on top of you. And he's going, Iggy, Iggy, Iggy. And I know what he's trying to do, but I'm wondering if Jerome can even hear him. And all of a sudden the puck comes out front to Sid, and he sticks it to the back of the net, and Canada wins. I'm telling you guys right now, of all the things I've been a part of, I got goosebumps thinking about it right now. Of all the things, that's the one I remember, because it wasn't just the moment. It was the internal relief of a whole country, because they'd been embarrassed in '06. '06 was an unbelievable embarrassment in Torino. Trust me, it was bad. And '02, I was in Salt Lake City. I wasn't doing the games. I was working on a panel, so I saw them win in '02. But 2010, you could just feel the whole country just, thank God we won. And to take it one step further, I started leaving the compound outside. It was GM Place at the time, I think. Now it's Rogers Arena. And I was walking out, and I got swarmed by fans. Nothing bad. They were awesome. They just wanted a high five and way to go. And the RCMP saw that, and they were worried that I was going to get overrun. So the guy picks me up and puts me on the back of his horse and rides me to my hotel. I was sitting on the back of a horse going back to my hotel. And I said to the officer, I said, I can't thank you enough. He goes, no, we were worried you were going to get run over. I was like, no, well, it was great. The fans were awesome. But yeah, it's one of those I'll never forget. I'll never forget that.
It would be a perfect way to finish it off, but I got one more that I got to throw one up to each of the guys on here. We've had some intense discussions about the talent level of Brady Tkachuk, and I seem to be the only one on our podcast that is a big believer in him. You brought his name up earlier in the show, and you were part of his signing process. You guys talked about that on the Sick podcast. What makes him such an unbelievable talent in the NHL?
He's vicious, man. You don't want to play against this guy. Every single day is like a nightmare if you play against him. He's unpredictable. He's tough as nails. He's passionate to score. He's not afraid to fight anybody. He's really loyal to his teammates in those kinds of situations. He establishes slot area presence probably as well right now. I'm just going around the league thinking about those types of players as well as any player in the league. And his ability to play pucks off the boards. And this is a way undervalued thing in the NHL, guys. Players that can make plays off the boards. It's hard to do, and he does it as well or better than most players in the league right now. I was heavily involved in the contract negotiations with him. And it's one of those that I'll always remember because it required both sides to give a little and take a little. So it was an interesting negotiation, but it was well worth it for Ottawa, and it was obviously great for the Tkachuk family. But I'm a big Brady fan. He's a kind of guy you have to win. You need to have a player like that to win.
Perfect way to finish it off. Matt and George will never be able to top that one. Pierre, you are the man. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here.
You guys have my number. Case, you can call anytime. You can text anytime. I love your passion for the game. I just think it's so great that people care so much about hockey. And I know where you guys are from, and I just think it's awesome. Two of the best years of my life were in the North Country. I know it was on the wrong side of the tracks for you guys, but that's okay. I loved Canada. I'd always go visit Potsdam from time to time, so I kind of know it pretty well. And one of my best friends in the world is Billy O'Flaherty, the longtime coach and athletic director at Clarkson. So I'm a big fan.
Next time you're up, if it's warmer than it's about to be for the next 5 months, we'll have to get out on the golf course. That might be the one time, other than the rivalry series, I take a trek down Route 11 to go to that town.
Here's the one thing. I think the next time I'm there, it'll be snowing, so we'll have to either go somewhere we can warm up. How's that?
Sounds good to me. Pierre, thanks so much.
You guys are great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.